All right, gang. We're going to go ahead and get started with the iOS development talk. This is Evan Teeters. He's going to be talking to you guys today. I think for the first part, he's just going to be talking a little bit, explaining some stuff, and then there's some stuff that he'll show you, cut along a little bit. So, yeah. Evan, take it away.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, guys. First, I want to just ask, how many people here have experience? Also, is this loud? Am I a good? I can. Okay. Okay. Cool. How many people here have experience with Swift? I see one person from my two from my club, but it looks like no. Okay, good. So then, programming experience in the room, I assume, is pretty new. Is that correct? Okay. So what I'm going to do in this talk is first give a really brief history of Swift, the language that you use to develop for iOS applications, and some of the benefits and a few of the downsides and kind of where it's going in the future. After that, I'm going to start you from scratch on making a very simple Hello World style app. So who am I? I've worked on 3 apps, 2 of which have been on the App Store. I taught myself Swift for the RJI competition here at Mizzou a year or 2 ago, and I worked on a startup called Kolu, which is a travel app, and I worked on the TigerTalks app. So I have a good deal of experience programming. Swift was announced 4 years ago at WWDC, the Worldwide Developer Conference, and then a year later it was made open source. The goal of Swift was to be essentially a faster and better alternative to Objective-C, which was the standard before that, and is still used in some, like most places, I guess, in production for iOS applications. Their goals were to make it safe, make it fast, and make it expressive. So how did they do that? There's some strictness in the language, and I don't know if I'll get to this in the coding part or not, but there's an idea of optionals in Swift, which I'm not sure how familiar most of you are with null values, but if you're coding in something like C and you try to read from something or use something that's null, you'll get like a segmentation fault or a memory error. And optionals in Swift are essentially a way to force people to contain those. Did you go off? Yeah.
I'm going to have to replace some batteries.
Okay. To contain those null values. So optionals just let you have safer code. To make it faster, there's several optimizations that make it just faster than Objective-C. You can see a slide that they presented at the first WWDC where Swift was announced that Swift is a lot faster at certain things like object sorting than Objective-C or Python. Oh no. How's that? No. Sound better? No. So this all the mic is off.
No, that one's off. See ya.
Hello? That sounds good. Okay, cool. So finally, there's modern syntax and tools to make it more expressive. Their goal is to make it a joy to program in and to make it easy to understand. And if you compare it to things like Objective-C, it's definitely a lot more understandable. So there are a lot of really concrete benefits to using Swift and programming for iOS stuff. But a few of the downsides, it is constantly changing. It is open source and it's really new. We're on Swift version 4 right now. And there have been really significant changes from version 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. And because of that, it's kind of hard. It can be hard to keep up with. If you've got a really big code base, then you might have to do a lot of updating every time there's a new version. So there, a lot of bigger companies aren't using this in production just yet. Another disadvantage is you have to code on a Mac, essentially, because Xcode is the IDE that you write Swift in primarily and develop iOS apps in primarily, and Xcode only works on a Mac. There are some workarounds, but it's not ideal. There's also project size can be a little big because Swift is changing so much right now. There's what's called the application binary interface is not stable. So what that essentially means is every time you compile a Swift application, all the Swift libraries you use go into the application itself instead of being on the device that you're using. So Swift executables and apps are going to be a lot bigger than Objective-C ones. So those are some of the downsides, but it is going good places in the future. Development on Swift 5 is working on a more stable release. They're working on application binary interface stability. So a lot of people think that once Swift 5 comes out, it'll be seen a lot more by big companies in production because it's finally gotten to kind of where they want it to be. A lot of the features are pretty robust now. And it won't be seeing as many changes after Swift 5, probably. The language changes will be smaller. So it's a good language or a good development paradigm to get into, just because there aren't a whole lot of Swift developers right now, especially for big companies. So there'll be a lot of jobs for this in the future. Pull the mic off your shirt. Oh, yeah. Okay, and these are all, I have the this up at the beginning. If you want to go here, all these links that I'm about to talk about are on my website, and the presentation is there as well. I forgot to mention that. But so if you're looking into developing for iOS applications or doing work for Swift, swift.org is a really good resource. They've got a blog that details what they're doing. The Apple developer docs are usually very good. The documentation is pretty easy to read. They really, with Swift, have placed a huge value on education, being able to understand what you're doing. So the docs are good. And I'll show this to you in a little bit, but in Xcode, there's a really easy way to just look at documentation and find out what things are that you're using. So that's really helpful. I would also recommend going to, Dale gave his talk earlier, right? Yeah, Dale's YouTube channel just has a lot of good tutorials that he uses for his classes. Those are good. There's a blog that I've used a lot of tutorials from in the past called Ray Winderlich. I think he's just an iOS developer that does a lot of tutorials that are really useful. Some of the things to be wary of for Swift, especially because it's so new and changing. If you're using Stack Overflow, which you should, keep an eye out for what version the answers are addressing. So you can see here, this person did a really good job of highlighting, keeping updates for his answers for what version of Swift his answer applies to. This answer was pretty complicated and it seemed like it changed for every version. So it's really good to be able to see that. Also in the bottom right there, you can just see the date the Stack Overflow thing was edited. Make sure that's fairly recent because you don't want to get tripped up by something like that. If you're Googling things, it's always useful to set your results to the past year just because those will be the most relevant. That'll change going forward as things get a little more stable, but right now it's a good idea. And then to learn more about Swift, I won't be doing this today, but when you open Xcode, you can start what's called a playground, which allows you to play with the language, work with things, find out what works and what doesn't. It's really helpful because it will compile and show you how things are running as you do it, which is really useful. And if you're interested in design, the human interface guidelines are available online. I put that link in there as well. Those are just Apple's guidelines for design, how to use different elements, how to use a tab bar controller, how to style buttons or where to place buttons. They're pretty meticulous and it's really interesting to go through, and just reading these can kind of help you see how these different elements that you have access to in iOS development are meant to be used, which can be really be useful. Okay, so any questions about Swift before we get into the coding? I'm going to make a basic app for you, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay, so you should all have Xcode on your computers. My screen is really tiny, but I've got Xcode popped up right here. So if you open that, you should see this, but if you don't, you can go to the top and click File. Let's see.
You gotta go change the display resolution.
Oh, yeah. Where's that?
So go to Preferences.
Is that system
Yeah.
purposes?
Displays, second row. And then,
So tiny.
yeah,
Command space.
do scaled. Scaled.
Hmm.
And then do like the middle one.
Oh yeah, that's better. Cool.
There we go.
All right.
There, look, you can actually see now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you do command space Xcode, you'll be able to pull it up. That's a good point. And so I've done that. You should see this. We're going to click on create a new Xcode project. And I'm doing this from the beginning because there are some things that might be a little intimidating when you first start to create an app. So I'm starting from the beginning. So we'll do a single view app. And what we're going to make is just a basic Hello World app so that when you press a button, you see displayed Hello World. So I'm going to make this, let's see, Hello World. Cool, way of working, Mike.
See if that works. Just tap on it first.
Cool. Awesome. That's a little better. Thank you. Okay. So, hello world. I don't believe you'll have the same information here. Team can be whatever's the default. Organization can be whatever is probably the default, or just type com dot whatever. These checkboxes here aren't super important for us right now. Those are things that you learn about much later. So it doesn't really matter if they're checked or not. It just includes some things for you when you make the project. So we'll hit next. Save it wherever. I'll name this hello TigerTalks for me, but you can name it whatever. Okay, and your project should be ready to go. So most of you probably haven't worked in Xcode before, so we're going to take a minute just to get familiar because it can be a lot to look at. So I'll just start in the top left. Up here you've got the run button, a stop button. That runs the simulator. So the simulator is something that Xcode has that lets you simulate any iOS device that you want. You have all the way up to the 5S, all the way back to the 5S. So that's how you do that. To the top right, you have controls over your different pieces of the window that you see. So I'm going to start with these buttons here. If you just click on them, you see the different panels slide in and slide out. The bottom window is the console. The one to the left is your file explorer, as well as a few other things that we'll look at later. The one to the right has general information about whatever you're doing in the center. So this project information that I'm looking at right now isn't important for us today. I'm going to go to the file explorer over here, which you have to make sure you have this project navigator selected. Then we click on main.storyboard to show you this. So the storyboard is part of what's called the interface builder. The interface builder in Xcode, essentially it helps you build the interface that you want to build. So what we're seeing right now is the app screen that we would see if we were to launch it, right? Right now it's blank, because that's what they give you. What we're going to do first is add some information to this. Let's see, does anyone have questions about the layout of Xcode or anything like that? Anything that we're looking at here? Okay, cool. So what I'm actually going to do first is delete this because there's something I like to demonstrate for people. So I'm going to do that again. Just drag over all of it and hit delete. And actually do the same with this view controller here. You'll see this in the file explorer. Just click on it and hit delete. Oops. If it'll let me. Oh, yeah, move to trash. All right. So I'm going to click back on the main storyboard. And what we're going to do first is go to the object library. So this is something I haven't shown you yet. In the top right, where you'll see this button here. And it says library. If you hover over it, click on that. And it will show me this. So you can scroll through here and see all of the objects that we have available to us to place into the interface builder. So we have a lot of control. I mean, there's things like gesture recognizers or buttons or image views. What we're going to start with is a view controller. So a view controller is the basic building block of iOS application. That's your view, essentially. They represent the screen that you're seeing. So that's what we need. And then I'm going to go back to the object library and look up a label, because what we want to do is have hello world displayed on a text label. So I'm going to place that here. And I'm going to leave it saying label, but if you double click on it, you can change that word to whatever you want. But I want it to say this for now. And just to show you something, I want to click run now. So do that. And this is a pretty common mistake that people make sometimes. You'll see that the label that I made isn't here. That's because Xcode's interface builder is looking for the first view controller. It doesn't know where to start. So what we need to do is click on view controller, have this selected. It'll be highlighted in blue kind of around the edges. And then go over to the side here. You'll see these little buttons. What we're going to do is click on this, which is the attribute inspector. I always forget the name, little down arrow. Yeah, attributes inspector. And then what this is doing is showing you information based off of what you have selected in the center screen. So because we have the view controller selected, we're seeing what we can title it. And here, this checkbox that says is initial view controller, and you check that. Once you've done that, you'll see this little arrow here showing us that that is indeed the first view controller now, so that it knows this is where I need to show first. Otherwise, it's just a blank screen. So there you go. So now what we're going to do is click on the object library and add a button. And hopefully I didn't do that too fast. If you just type button in the search bar, you should be able to find it. And then drag it in. So now we've got a label and a button sitting here. Okay. And then double click.
Yeah, so we double click labels and it left justifies the center of the page and was getting centered.
No, I'm missing the
It's-
safe. That's
Okay, they're all missing safe.
Save.
They're missing things here and
It's
back
not
over there.
white, that's the problem, it's not white. And
Yeah.
this happened to me during the Swift state, and I'm trying to remember how to fix it. And I never got it.
Yeah, I just want to see what it does in here.
Okay.
That one's minor.
Yeah, this one's fine, I don't know what this one's doing. It's doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I've never seen it like this.
I can't really.
Oh, view controllers. So yeah, some of you are having this problem where the view controller is grayed out, I suppose. I don't know why that's happening. I would just try adding another one.
Okay.
Let me know if that helps. Because I've never seen that before. I guess this is missing a safe area. Is that the problem?
Yeah, that's what it says up there, is that it's a
Yeah.
safe area, and I don't have that safe
Yeah,
area.
it should just add it when you drag it out.
I don't know.
I don't even know if we have safe. No. Huh. It's interesting. Okay, is everyone able to get that figured out? Is anyone still seeing the? Yeah.
Oh, it just takes time. Oh.
This version of Excel.
I think it's one plus.
Or is it just?
I don't know. I'm gonna try to give you a picture.
Can you see it? You just gotta change it to in the system preferences. You just gotta change it to built-in red. Like optimized display for displays. Optimized for
There you go. That's much better than what you're doing.
Yeah, no, a lot of the live applications do that by default.
I don't. Yeah, it's like it's really fluctuating. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Is anyone else's computer like that right now?
I thought we fixed most of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. All right. Okay. Is anyone else running into significant issues? Okay. So what I want to show you now is, let's say I put this label here. Actually, I'm going to drag it to where you see the blue lines that show you the center and of the horizontal and vertical. I'm going to put the label here and the button just underneath it somewhere. If we run this, we'll see another issue. It's not exactly centered here, this label. And if we go to hardware and go to, where is it? Rotate left, or if we hit command left or right arrow key, it'll rotate the phone, and you'll see that the label and button aren't quite where we expected it to be. So rotate that back and stop this. The problem is that we don't have constraints. So constraints are a thing that Interface Builder has that allows us to tell it what distance we want it to be from other objects. Constraints are really versatile. They allow you to essentially connect any two objects, and they're necessary to do any kind of placement. So what we're going to do is add some so that it knows where it needs to be. So I'm going to drag off of this. So I'm going to hold down Control on my computer, and then click on label and drag off of it. You should see a blue line if you're holding down the Control button.
Control?
Yes. And click and drag off of it. So hopefully everyone's able to get that. And I'll let go of the blue line, and it will show me these different options for constraints that I can add. So what I'm going to do is say we want this to be centered horizontally and centered vertically. And then that'll have those constraints, and we can click off of it. And now it looks like I'm getting some little orange lines that say, so these lines are saying these constraints are trying to put this label somewhere else, so it's not positioned correctly. So if you go to the very bottom right, down here, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but it looks like this little refresh button. You hit update frames, it'll put it in the right spot. Now we're going to do the same with button. I'm going to control click drag from button, but this time I'm going to do it to the label. So this is kind of a relative constraint. And let go, and we'll see a bunch of options. I'm going to hit vertical spacing because I know I want it to be a certain distance from the label. And now we've got that, but if I click on the button, we'll see little red lines to the sides of it, and a little arrow up here that's showing me there's an error. So if I look at that, it will say the button is missing constraints. And the reason for that is that every constraint needs at least an X and Y position. So as soon as you place one constraint, it needs to know how it's positioned in the other dimension, because otherwise it's ambiguous and doesn't really make sense to the interface builder. So I also need to add a button constraint. So what I'm going to do is center it horizontally with the label, which should allow for it to, this is not allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Turn that down, I guess. Does this work? Oh, here we go. I guess it makes a noise. Is that better?
It's a little bit better.
Okay. Cool. So are there any issues with the constraints? Very cool. So now, if we run it, it should show us that if we rotate it, it'll now be positioned correctly with respect to which way the screen is oriented. So I'll rotate it with command right arrow, and it looks good. So that's a brief introduction to Interface Builder. You'll use this a lot to add all kinds of elements. I would recommend going through the object library and playing with things that you see, like if you wanted to add a text field or a slider or a switch. There's all kinds of things that you can add and control. So now what we need to do is add some kind of logic to this system, because we have a label and a button, but nothing is happening if you press the button right now, right? So to do that, we'll have to add some code that's associated with this view controller. So to do that, I'm going to go up to File and New and hit File. Over that for a second. And then what we want is a Cocoa Touch class. Oops. So I'm going to click on this, hit next. So what we want this to be is a UI view controller. So the subclass of should say UI view controller. And I'm going to call this, oops, hello.